Hi everyone, welcome to Bible Bites. This week I want to briefly look at the theme of empathy in the Bible, and I want to look specifically at John chapter 11. I'm going to read from verse 32 onwards. It's the story of Jesus and Lazarus, and then we'll share some thoughts. So it says this: Now when Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother, that's Lazarus, would not have died. And when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and greatly troubled. And he said, Where have you laid him? And they said to him, Lord, come and see. Jesus wept. And so the Jews said, See how he loved him. But some of them said, Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man also have kept this man from dying? And then Jesus, deeply moved again, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. And Jesus said, Take away the stone. This story has so much to say about who John thinks Jesus is. It has so much to say about the greater story of John's Gospel as a whole. And I'd love to go into that, but I'm going to withhold and focus just particularly on the theme of empathy here. How does Jesus respond to losing someone he loves, to losing a great friend? How does he respond when he's faced with Martha and Mary and the crowd? How does he respond to the weeping? It's amazing, I think, that it says that Jesus was greatly disturbed, greatly troubled. It says this twice, and in between, it says that Jesus wept. Jesus is not some stoic, he's not distant. He doesn't withhold himself from people or refuse to get emotionally entangled and involved. He feels the full force of the pain of loss alongside his friends. The words that are used to describe how Jesus feels here are incredibly strong. They are words that are used they would have conjured up really strong images in the imaginations of the people who had read them. One of the words is a word that is used for a horse that is exhaling with all its force when it's distressed and in trouble, when it's angry, when it's facing something it's not sure about. It's this visceral, strong reaction to the way things are, to what he sees. Now, to account for Jesus' response, there have been a number of interpretations that have been offered. The first one simply says that Jesus is angry at the reality of death. He's angry at the reality, the way the world is, that we experience this suffering and this pain. He's angry that it's not as God would intend it to be, and it's not as he would intend it to be. I can resonate with that. I can see that. And I think that connects with how we see the world today, that we look at how things are and we see a world that is not as it should be, not as God would intend it to be. I think there's something very powerful there. A second interpretation is that what it says at the beginning of the story, Jesus said this illness will not end in death. And so Jesus is not crying over Lazarus per se, but he's more crying over Martha and Mary for their lack of faith. Now, that doesn't resonate with me, but I'm always willing to listen to a different interpretation, because what I think about who Jesus is might be different from what the Bible's trying to say, and sometimes I need to be challenged by that. But certainly here, I think a third interpretation, which is the one I go with, is more helpful. It says that Jesus was grieving for the loss of his friend. It says that he was feeling the full force of the pain of losing someone he loves and sharing that with the people that he loves. Empathy is incredibly powerful. It allows us to see people and see their perspective. It allows us to place ourselves, as it were, in their shoes and to understand how they're feeling. It creates a bridge between people. It fights against isolation by connecting people and experience, to enable people to know that they are known. Crucially, psychological research and in medicine has shown extensively that empathy is the vital precursor, it's the vital ingredient needed to experience compassion. Empathy is what drives action to transform a situation. And certainly we can see that in this story here, that Jesus, he goes to the tomb and he calls Lazarus out. And it mirrors the story of him going to the cross, of him who's going to die to transform this situation of death in the world, this situation of suffering and pain. That's driven by Jesus' empathy, by him understanding what it's like, how it is to live in the world as it is, by experiencing the full force of the pain and the brokenness, and then using that as a resource to impel his action to transform the situation. Empathy leads to compassion, and compassion is being willing to suffer alongside someone, and not only for its own sake, but to bring transformation through being known, through understanding, and through walking with someone in the pain. I think it's fascinating and deeply moving that the God who created the universe and everything in it will enter into my perspective and feel the pain and the brokenness that I feel and everyone else in the world. There's lots there to think about, especially given this time, especially given that many of us will have lost people or know people who have lost people, especially given how much our lives have been changed and disturbed by this current situation. Know that there is a God of deep empathy who feels our pain with us, and know that we can too participate in that action of empathy that leads us to transform the situations we're in through compassionate suffering alongside others. Thank you.